Most podcast guests never decide what they want from an interview. And when you don't decide, your strategy defaults to just giving value, sharing tips, and hoping that you get results. That's not a strategy. So, what happens is they go in wanting everything, leads, visibility, authority, collaboration, content. And when you try to get everything, and do everything, you end up doing like a little bit of everything and none of it well. And so it's kind of like throwing spaghetti against a wall and hoping it sticks. What you do need is a podcast guesting game plan, a clear plan where you do everything before, during, and after the podcast interview with one aligned goal. Because right now, a lot of podcast guests are prepping one way and then they're showing up in the interviews a different way and then doing nothing afterwards to amplify their authority with the episode. And so there's no through line, there's no intention, there's no direction. And so today, I want to walk you through the most common goals for podcast guesting, how they impact your strategy, and what you should be doing differently based on the results that you want. So, the first one here is content. So, guesting on podcasts is a super easy way to create content that is yours, to leverage it and repurpose it. And anyone that's following me these days knows that I'm a huge proponent of repurposing and leveraging. And so that includes publishing the blog to your website, emailing your list, creating reels and shorts that get you in front of audiences that aren't already following you, publishing the video on YouTube, create carousels, quotes, LinkedIn articles. I mean, I'm not going to do a deep dive into the whole repurposing strategy, but if you do want to hear more about how my agency helps people leverage and repurpose their guest episodes, you can go to leverageyourpodcast.com/repurpose. So again, if your goal is content, then the way you show up on podcasts, the way you share your information, and how you're talking about your expertise is different because you're optimizing your talking points to create bite sized phrases, lists, repeatable frameworks, emotional hooks, pain statements, clear pieces that can be taken out once the episode goes live. And so you might intentionally say things like, 5 ways to, blah, 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 or here are 3 reasons that XYZ. You may pause more after key statements so that it's easier to break up those pieces of information after the fact. You would likely create more story sound bites. So, sharing client results that are under a minute long, very concise, but showcases your expertise, the results that you get for your clients, so they can picture what it's like to work with you. So, that's how you would change the strategies a little bit if your goal is to use podcast guesting for creating content. Now, if your goal is relationships and collaborations, then you will do it very differently because it's not so much then about the audience and the potential leads. It's all about the relationship that you have with the host. And it is a gold mine. So don't completely discount it regardless. But it's not just networking, right? It's like JVs, collaborations, partnerships, referrals. How can you be more involved with their clients and their community? This is where you will do way more research on the types of shows that you want to guest on. You will be doing more research on the podcast hosts themselves and looking at their website, their business. Who do they serve? What are their services? What is their expertise? And seeing where there is synergy or overlap or gaps in each other's services that you could help each other fulfill. I'll give you a couple of examples. So let's say you both serve plumbers and you do websites and the host does Facebook ads, then 100% you guys can help each other out and collaborate and refer business to each other. Um, Maybe you can even have your business built into their ecosystem or program where they serve their clients, a gap in their services that you could fulfill. Or what if you're both a tax coach, but one of you serves home service businesses and the other serves, I don't know, dentists. And so that is another opportunity where you can refer business to each other for people that you don't serve. Or think about who and what comes before your service in the client journey. So if you help people write books, maybe you would want to align yourself with someone that is like a podcast booking agency or a media strategist to get them booked on like TV and so forth. And so it would make sense for you guys to collaborate. Now, this episode isn't about collaborations and partnerships, so I'm not going to deep dive into that. But if your main focus is collaboration, you're going to think about your strategies differently. You're going to prioritize guesting on aligned shows, again, doing more research about the host and their audience, their services. You're going to do much more relationship building, so social engagement, um, following them on Facebook and commenting on their posts or just nurturing the connection before the interview. You're going to create a follow up plan or even a collaboration plan, right? If you have ideas ahead of time on different opportunities that you can work together and help each other grow your businesses, you're going to want to create that plan ahead of time. And so your focus then isn't so much on the content and the audience. The focus is on the host and their business and the collaboration. Now, if you're like most guests, one of the biggest goals are leads. And so when your goal is leads, then yes, it's all about the audience and compelling them to take the next step. And this is where it's even more important that you need to be strategic about your topics, about your interview questions, your talking points, your story sound bites, and your call to action. All those pieces that make up the actual conversation that you're having on those shows. And so every single piece needs to be very intentional. The whole conversation should be your bridge to profits. What I mean by that is that it needs to bridge the gap between the audience's pain and your offers. And so how you do that are many things, but I'm going to give like a quick overview. You do need to have interview questions to give the host. It's actually your interview GPS or your conversation compass. It's what guides the host to ask the questions that set you up to position yourself as an expert and say what you want to say versus a host going rogue and asking about your journey and asking about, an event that you did or I mean, I'm sure you've been on many podcasts where the conversation is all over the place. And then, of course, you want to make sure that your talking points are concise, where you share your framework or methods, you position yourself as an expert in a way that the audience understands. That's really key. And you want to seed your programs, seed your courses, and help the audience picture what it's like to work with you. I mentioned story sound bites earlier. So, yes, story sound bites are key in creating a short little story, a minute long, 90 seconds long, that helps the audience picture the results that you create in like a non salesy way, right? It helps them to self identify and also compel them to see you as a solution. And obviously, your call to action, super key because that's the next step that they're going to take that moves them further towards your offers, which is what you want if you want leads and clients. And so you can't give a laundry list of different options. They're not going to remember them. And you don't want to just send them to your website and hope that they find the right resource, but they're going to get sidetracked by all of the things. And you want to not hope that they are intrigued by you and just look you up and find you and search for you and reach out, because I guarantee you that is not going to happen. You want to give them the next thing to do. And it takes a lot of planning and clarity and messaging and strategy and practice. And this is where most guests fail. And that's the part I love doing, pulling out your brilliance, pulling out your passion, what makes you different, your frameworks when I work privately with clients in the Conversations That Convert program. And so if you do want to know more about that, you can go to leverageyourpodcast.com/convert. Okay, so we have covered if your goal is content. We have covered if your goal is relationships and collaborations. And we have covered if your goal is leads. Another big part of the goals of guests is authority. So, visibility, credibility, being known. And if your goal is authority, most people think they're focused on that, but they're kind of actually not. Authority is not built just by being seen. So some people think that, oh, they're a guest on a podcast, they're building their authority. It takes more than that. It's built by being remembered, trusted, and associated with something specific. So you have to think about what you want to be known for, clarity of message, consistency of your positioning, simplicity over complexity. You want to be recognized and known for one thing. And I'm actually going to explain this in a more 360 view of guesting. So, looking at it from before, during, and after the interview so that you can get a bigger picture of how those strategies play out. Because authority is such a huge part of guesting. So, before the interview, right, you want to be very clear on what you want to be known for. Not five things, not everything that you do, one core problem, one core solution, one core message. So, what do you want listeners to associate you with? What do you want to be known for? And of course, you're going to align your topics in the conversation around that, not random topics or what's trending like AI right now or what you think is interesting. Again, you're really thinking strategically about bridging that gap between the audience's pain and your offers. That is important regardless of what your goal is. And then you want to prep your talking points so that you can clearly explain what it is that you do, tie back to your core message, but be simple enough that it can be repeated. And then during the interview, and this is really important, is that you don't want to share everything. And that's what happens so often. They start teaching and explaining and giving more and sharing more. And by sharing too much, they actually dilute their message. And so your job is to anchor and repeat. You want to stay within that same core message in different ways. Bring answers back to your main idea. Use simple language. Reinforce your framework, your method, your process. And again, you don't want to cover everything, but you want to make sure that they get one thing clear. And so you are going to reuse the same examples, stories, analogy, because that builds recognition. And that's a spot where a lot of guests get that wrong. And then after the interview, authority simply compounds. You don't just share the episode once and kind of move on. You want to repurpose clips that reinforce your core message. Share posts that highlight your positioning. Continue the conversation around the same idea over and over, and yes, over again. So many guests are so worried about, "Ugh, I talk about the same thing on all of these shows. I don't want to share them because people are going to be sick of it." Not if you want to be known for that one thing. And I guarantee you, you have new audience members, new community members, new followers, new people on your email list. They will not have heard these stories over and over and over again. They won't get bored of it. And people need to hear things multiple times in different ways for it to like sink in or just give them that, ah, I get it now, that aha moment. So every podcast that you guest on, think of it as like building these bricks, right, for your authority platform. If every interview sounds different, you're not building anything. You're starting over every time. And this is where people get it wrong. Oh, I'm just repeating myself. Yes, that's a good thing. You're reinforcing the authority that you have. And you want to be known for one thing. So you do have to repeat it over and over and over again. It's okay. Because credibility is not built by how much you teach. It's more you want people to think clearly in that, "Oh, yeah, she's the one who helps with this." So I just wanna change your perspective on that a little bit. So that is a lot on authority, but it's an important block. Now, I do work with a lot of authors, nonfiction authors, that is. And book sales is often a big reason why authors, of course, get booked on shows. And yes, book sales, but you have to think about it more holistically in regards to like authority, demand, and momentum. You want them to think, oh, I like this person. I trust this person. I want more of what they have to say. You want to pique their curiosity and have them see you as an authority. And so before the interview, when you're preparing your talking points and what your guesting topic is about, you don't want to cover the whole book. Think about what is the core idea of the book? What problem does it solve? And what is the hook that makes someone want to read it? And so you choose topics and how you talk about it based on that. Yes, absolutely. Bring in a couple of stories from the book, a framework or concept that you can explain clearly in the podcast episode. You just don't want to, while you're on the podcast, to summarize the whole book, give a chapter overview, and give, don't give the ending away, even if it's nonfiction. And again, you can easily weave in specific language that says things like, oh, this is something I dive deeper into the book, or there's a part of this that most people miss, and I go into detail in the book. One of the biggest shifts I talk about in the book is this. So you're guiding them towards, oh, I need to read this. And then after the interview, think about that content and repurpose it to drive people to your book. You don't have to use all the content to drive to the episode. You can definitely use the content to drive and reinforce your book. So you're staying within that theme, that core idea. And so, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this episode, is that getting booked on a show is not the end goal. It's not the strategy. You need a whole guesting game plan to create the strategy before, during, and after the mic. And you need to decide on what that goal is first so that you can drive the strategy towards what outcomes that you want to get from guesting. And as soon as you decide and get clarity on that goal, then everything changes, right? You prep differently, you show up differently, you follow up differently. You even repurpose it differently. And then your interviews start working for you. Every step of the way, it's moving towards the same goal. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, yep, I'm not entirely sure what my goal is, and I'm doing all the things, and I'm not getting the results that I want, then this is where you need a game plan. And if you want podcast interviews to drive traffic and results, whether that's authority, whether it's leads, whether it's book sales, I invite you to have an interview impact review with me. You can go to leverageyourpodcast.com/impact, and I will listen to your episode, look at your assets, how you're repurposing it, and find the areas where opportunities are being lost. You're leaving money on the table, and give you a clear plan on how to fix that so that your interviews are more intentional and more strategic. And of course, if you want to work privately with me as well, you can always email me at Lindsay, Lyndsay, at smoothbusinessgrowth.com. So if I hope this episode has helped, and I just want to make sure that you really land and think about what your goals are. Think about all the moving pieces in your guesting strategy before, during, and after, and think about how can I make it more intentional at every little step so that you're moving towards that goal. And again, I'm always here to help you guys. So Lindsay at Smooth Business Growth if you have any questions, and I'll see you in a couple weeks. Take care.